So thanks a lot, everyone. And now let me talk about Matt Griffin. So we are living in times of chaos in many aspects. So when we search for someone to speak to us and share what lies ahead, we didn't want someone nice who would fill us with hope. We wanted someone that who would bring the good, the bad, and the ugly, so we can actually be prepared. And we think that this person is Matt Griffin. He's the fanatical futurist, founder of the 311 Institute, and known as the advisor behind the advisors. Matt has worked with several government members of the G20, and today he's here to pick up our brains and share what he's seeing on the future. Matt, thank you very much for being with us. And now it's your show time.
Thank you very much, Anna. So, yeah, that's a wonderful introduction. So I'm now going to upset you all, fill you with hope and love and joy, and then just send you spinning on your way as you start mixing your martinis and your coffees together. That's it. I think that's probably the epitome of what I'm going to be demonstrating and showing you today. So I'm very much a show and tell guy. So with no further ado, I'll share my screen. Here we go. So hopefully you can see. Hopefully you can see that. Was that all okay?
Yes, perfect.
See, nodding. Excellent. So today, basically, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through a whole variety of different aspects of the future. So we're going to be talking about the future of customer experience. We're going to put this into the lens of the financial services community. A little bit of feedback there. I'm also going to lift the lid on disruption. And really go down what I call basically the infinite wormhole that is the future. And when we think about the times that we're living in today, this time last year I was talking about the new normal because increasingly we face a lot of disruption. When we start coming out of COVID, everyone is talking about the new normal. So I'm wondering if that is actually the new normal that we start heading into after when all this starts settling down. So when we start having a look at the future, as a futurist, if I step back about 7 years ago and I rocked up on anyone's doorstep and said that I was a futurist, I think the vast majority of people would look at you basically with a sort of a little bit of disdain, a little bit of laughter in their face, and they'd sort of send you on their way. However, consider this. Today we live in disruptive times. Every industry is being disrupted. Every industry is being upended. If I went back just 10 years ago and I was fortunate enough to sit down with all of the CEOs of every automotive industry, every automotive company on the planet, whether that was GM, Ford, or whether it's Volkswagen, Audi, and the rest of the guys, and I said to them, by 2015, 2016, 2017, I think that you will all be spending hundreds of billions of dollars developing fully autonomous vehicles that drive themselves, that you no longer sell to customers, and that are electrified. At that point, I guarantee in 2010, I would have been shown this. In futurist terms, it's a door. In everyone else's terms, it's an airlock. And the same basically is the same goes basically for any industry. If I stepped back into the 1980s and I sat down with prime ministers and governments and said, in the year 2020, I foresee a shortage of data scientists, software developers, cybersecurity specialists. Yeah, back in the 1980s, people would have said, well, okay, cybersecurity specialists, yeah, what do they do? And you say, well, they protect this thing called the internet. To which the obvious question then becomes, well, what is this thing called the internet? And in 1980s, bearing in mind, this is only 40 years ago, this is one generation away, I would have then said to them with perfect knowledge, the internet is this system that connects over 3.5 billion people together on our planet. It has transformed every single corner of our society. Again, I would have been shown the door. So one of the problems that we typically have as a society is we think of the future as just being linear. We think tomorrow basically is going to be like today, but just a little bit different. And we think that ad infinitum. But increasingly, the future is exponential, and increasingly it's global. And as we start fast forwarding over the next 5 to 10 years, increasingly it goes cosmic, especially with a lot of new sort of space assets and industries that are starting to sort of jump up. So what I thought he'd do, since you've all managed to, hopefully you've got all your coffee packs and your gym packs. So depending which one you want to pick, I'm going to give you the opportunity just before we dive into the presentation, just to have a little bit of a break. So if you want to go and grab yourselves a coffee, if you want to 3D print yourself some chocolate, while we're doing that, I'm going to start taking you down the rabbit hole that is the deep future, and just show you how far along we are in terms of technology. Technology is a rocket ship. Regulators are typically people who are sitting on bikes with a puncture, and companies typically try to fit somewhere in the middle. So from a technological standpoint, we already have science fiction technologies here. Think of any science fiction technology, and I have videos for it. So on the left, what you see is we are using something called a brain-machine interface. We are combining it with artificial intelligence. We are reading people's brain waves as they are looking at geometric shapes, or as they are watching videos on YouTube. We've got generations beyond this now. This is streaming your brain and what you are thinking to YouTube in real time. On the right, we have genuine holograms. So these are created using femto lasers. They do not use augmented reality. They don't use glass. These are the real deal. If you watch Blade Runner 2049 with the big holographic ballerina, this here is the granddaddy. And since basically we're sort of starting to have a bit of a conversation about the financial services industry, weird fact, last year, Microsoft patented the use of brain-machine interfaces to let people mine cryptocurrency with their mind. So you can go and have a look at the USPO, basically, if you want to go and have a look at that particular patent. So we are now literally moving beyond the point where we can talk about money trees or money growing on trees to being able to create money with our minds. Now, in addition to that, when we have a look at every industry, I said every industry is being disrupted. This is the agricultural industry. This is how we solved global famine with one chicken.
We've all been there, right? In the grocery store. Oh, I'll just buy this meat. And there it is. And all we have to do is buy it. We don't have to think about what it took to make that chicken in that nice packaging. But the reality of the way that it came about, it's incredibly unsustainable. And that's one of the biggest problems facing humanity right now. But we figured out a way to solve it. The whole idea is that that chicken in itself has an unlimited source of itself, and there is a way where you can take just a handful of cells and keep growing them essentially infinitely. For those very first cells, it was important to us how we got the cells, not just that we got the cells. We came up with the idea to use one feather from the single best chicken that we could find. We picked up.
The first thing we need to do is we need to identify a cell that we are going to use as the basic starter material. And then what we need to do is find a food for it to grow in. So we have to identify the right set of nutrients that will cause the cells to multiply, but not just multiply, but do so quickly and into high densities.
It was an out-of-body experience to sit there and eat a chicken but have the chicken that you're eating running around in front of you. You don't imagine doing something like that.
So there we have at the very least 3 science fiction like technologies that are here today that you can buy off the shelf. We just solved global famine by taking one cell from one chicken, growing it in a culture, basically creating something called lab produced meat. Bearing in mind costs always start up here and they inevitably decrease. And you can feed the world high value protein without having to kill any animals, including Ian the chicken. So hopefully you've now got your coffees, so you're ready to sit back. So we're going to have a little bit of a conversation. A lot of people talk about business as usual. A lot of legacy organizations are often reprimanded basically for thinking in terms of business as usual. But today we actually are now in a state of disruption as usual. And that was before COVID started hitting all of our shores. So it's no surprise basically to say that, in a increasingly connected digital world, disruption is getting faster. So you've all seen these types of charts before. It took the telephone 75 years to hit 50 million users. It took Pokemon Go 19 days to hit 50 million users. It took Call of Duty 6 days to hit 100 million users. So at what point does an individual company create a product, a digital product, push it into the ether, hit all the right execution buttons and levers, and have that product either used or downloaded 100, 200, 300, 400, 500 million times in a day? At which point we are starting to get very close to being able to disrupt an entire global industry within a day. And it'd be a little bit remiss of me if I didn't show you an actual example of this in action. So who is more powerful today? President Donald Trump, President Xi, Boris Johnson, Mark Zuckerberg, or President Balasaurus? I could actually argue that the world's most powerful person is Mark Zuckerberg. And the reason for that is when you have a look at what he governs, he essentially governs a virtual nation that includes 2.2 billion people. When Facebook released their version of a cryptocurrency, Libra, within the space of a day, it sent the vast majority of central banks and governments into a tailspin. And the reason for that was because they felt that it was actually a threat to their sovereign currencies. If you have a look at articles, for example, in The Conversation, it was a significant enough announcement, basically, that it could have ended the state control of money, bearing in mind that the Libra would have been made up of a basket of different currencies and everything else. And the only reason why we are now not talking about Libra potentially replacing the US dollar as the world's default currency is not because of the technology. It's because of the company that was behind Libra. A lot of people don't necessarily trust Facebook. They're not regulated. They don't really answer to any particular government whatsoever. But if we had been able to trust Facebook, if they had already gone to these governments and the regulators and everything else, would you now be having to adapt your business with the Libra? And so Libra could have changed the global financial status quo within a day, because it wouldn't have been used by 50 million people in 2 weeks. It would have likely been used by 50 million people within 10 minutes, and so on and so on. So we are living in disruptive times, and those times basically those disruptions are coming faster and faster, which gives you less time to see them, and it gives you less time to react to them. And from a business perspective, that's an issue. Disruption is also more complex and confusing. If you have a look at it from a technology perspective, if I went back to the 1990s and I asked you all, what do you think your businesses can do with technology this year, or next year rather, sorry, that they couldn't do this year, you'd have looked at something like Moore's law, so computing. You'd have thought computers next year will be more powerful and cheaper next year in terms of price performance than they are this year, as well as computer servers. And you'd have thought, well, we could ingest more information, analyze more information, and with that, we could do X. However, when we start fast forwarding to today, one of the greatest problems that organizations have when I ask them that same question is this. When we start having a look at the number of exponential technologies that all of your businesses are able to play around with to create next generation products and services, I track over 450. So this is my starburst. It's organized into technology categories, and I won't go through it in detail, but just to sort of give you a flavor. Every single technology on this starburst, without exception, can either disrupt one global industry or every global industry. So for example, artificial intelligence is just one dot. The starburst goes from the year 2020 to 2070. If you have a look, for example, at 3D printing, which is in the brown segment, 3D printing, among other advanced manufacturing technologies, has the potential to disrupt the $10 trillion manufacturing industry. When we have a look at bioreactors in the advanced manufacturing space, that solves global famine. That's how we clone Ian the chicken, turn him into chicken nuggets without eating him. So, and we sort of go around this wheel. You know, when we have a look at the future of computing, we have quantum computers coming up in 2023, 2025. Most quantum computers are already able to show that they are anywhere between 100 million and a staggering amount more, 100 million times more performant than today's computing platforms, depending on how you use them and depending on how you write the algorithms. So quantum computers are almost here. They turn a lot of industries on their head. If you think about this in coronavirus terms, it's anticipated that a quantum computer would be able to create a coronavirus vaccine within a couple of minutes because of its power in terms of its ability to be able to crunch different compounds together. But beyond quantum computers, we already have biological computers where we've turned cells and even human cells into biological computing and storage devices. We have DNA computers coming through from the University of Manchester. A DNA computer that sits on a pinhead has more computing power than everything else on the planet combined. We have liquid computers that are already in the starting gates. And we go around this, but you know, as you start thinking about your future products and future products and services, they're all a combination of all of these different products. For example, you know, when we have a look at communications, you've got 5G coming through, you've got space internet coming through. Now, from a space internet perspective, we're throwing 12,000 low Earth orbit satellites into space right now. Why does that matter to your businesses? It matters to your businesses because the number of people who are connected to the internet today are between 3.5 to 4 billion people. In the next 5, let alone 10 years, every single person on the planet will have access to the equivalent of 4G or 5G connectivity. So all of a sudden, your total addressable market opportunity as a digital business providing digital services or whatever it happens to be doubles at a global scale. When we start having a look at artificial intelligence, we've got artificial general intelligence coming through in about 2035. We've managed to 3D print AIs. We've created artificial intelligences out of DNA. As I say, when you start having a look at the science fiction-like technologies that we already have in the labs today that are coming out of the labs today, they make science fiction they make the movie sort of science fictions, let's say, look relatively lame. And from a user experience perspective, again, I would be asking you, what can you do with augmented reality, virtual reality? What can we do with neural interfaces? So for example, we have neural interfaces that can now be packed into a pair of glasses. Mark Zuckerberg is trying to turn Facebook into the world's first telepathic social network. He hired Regina Duggan, the ex-DG of DARPA, to do that. And he's actually making some interesting progress. So you sort of go around the wheel. But there are huge, when you combine all these different technologies together, you disrupt everything. You disrupt every single part of culture, industry and society. Furthermore, when we actually have a look at the impact of all of these different technology combinations, basically on your businesses, on the products and services that you provide, technology also does this. Think of any product or service or anything that your business does, and think of it in terms of the amount of cost the amount of money that it costs you to run or provide or access, the amount of effort you have to expend, or the speed of that particular product or transaction. They're all reducing to zero. So anything in your business today that costs you a lot of money to do, is effort intensive and slow to do today, technology will increasingly accelerate it and drop all of the different cost, effort, speed per transaction to zero. And some examples of this are, how much does it cost you to access information today? You can Google it, it's free. How much does this particular call cost today from a communication standpoint? Bearing in mind it's a video call. We couldn't have done video calls 10 years ago. It's free. When we start having a look at cyber attacks, the cost of running and launching a cyber attack is increasingly dropping to zero, particularly with the advent of artificial intelligence robo hackers that can hack hack systems hundreds of millions of times faster than humans. Even when you have a look at water, when you start stretching it back far enough, 100 to 200 years ago, you'd have had to have gone to a river, you'd have had to have purified the water. Now you turn on the tap. Light. In the past, you'd have to get candles, gas lamps, or whatever it happens to be. Now you flick a switch on. We can drop the amount of effort it takes to turn your lights on even less than we have today, because I can voice control the lights. Gene sequencing used to cost $1 billion to do. Now it's $100. Legal services. JP Morgan recently used an artificial intelligence robo lawyer called Ross. And they automated parts of their legal department, and they saved over 400,000 man hours of work. And these robo lawyers basically are able to go through huge numbers of contracts in minutes, identifying clauses that are unfavorable or that you might want to change or whatever it happens to be. And then increasingly, as we move towards the future, access to expertise changes as well. So Google democratized access to information. Artificial intelligence will democratize access to expertise. And there's a whole variety of different ways that we can do that. That's a future of work conversation. We also have the rise of fully autonomous companies, both on Wall Street and in Hong Kong. So typically these are either communications companies or they're hedge funds at the moment. But nevertheless, using technologies like blockchain, automation, RPA technologies, and so on and so forth, we are getting to the point where autonomous companies are not only here, but the number of fully autonomous companies, they're called DAOs, are actually increasing. And then when you start having a look at your new disruptors, everyone is your new competition. You know, if I went and had a conversation with a retailer and asked them, what industry are you in? That retailer would call me stupid. And they'd say, well, we're in the retail industry, stupid. If I went and had the same conversation with a bank and said, what industry are you in? You'd naturally answer, we're in the financial services industry, and so on and so forth. When I go and ask that exact same question to a technology company, whether it's fatbag as so Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Tencent, Alibaba, Google, all those kinds of guys, and ask them the same question, say, what industry are you in? They will answer all of them. So when you start thinking about your own strategies, are you a financial services organization and just that's your vertical, that's your swim lane, as the Americans like to call it? Or should you put on the hat of the today's technology companies and say, well, we're in all of them? You know, if you're creating a global platform, just as the large technology companies create multi-sided businesses, why can't you start plugging other businesses into your platform? And then when we start talking about the speed of change and adaptability, we always talk in terms of older companies basically take a very long time to adapt. Adaptability is absolutely fundamental to today, and the speed of it being able to adapt. In normal times, it often takes most companies a very long time to adapt their businesses to the new future. It can take years. And it's because of politics, bureaucracy. People have got fiefdoms and kingdoms that they want to protect. You want to protect your status quo. You want to protect your core products and everything else. However, when there is a crisis, whether that crisis basically is coronavirus, basically, or whether that crisis is all of a sudden there's a new competitor on the block who's eating into your market share and you didn't see them coming, it's amazing how fast you can react. You know, and coronavirus basically is obviously the ultimate disruption, where on the Friday everything was business as usual, and on the Monday down in Sao Paulo basically they were closing bank branches. That's it, and trying to figure out how does everyone actually work from home. You know, how do customers access all of our different services? If you can move this fast in an emergency, why can't you move this fast normally? Startups do it, but again, they're much smaller businesses and they don't have legacy baggage. But nevertheless, speed is the new currency. And then how many of you actually spend most of your time here in Horizon 1, maintaining your business's core businesses? You know, so that's cutting costs, making sure that your business is operating as lean as possible and as cost effectively as possible. That's fine, but that's maintaining the status quo. I would typically say the vast majority of businesses spend about 80 to 90% of their time in Horizon 1 just focusing on their core business and trying to cut out the fat and just operate as lean as possible. But again, as the future accelerates, as the rate of disruption is not just larger and greater, but is also faster, I would postulate you should start spending more of your time proportionally in Horizon 2, which is where you explore and discover new possibilities and capabilities, but also in Horizon 3. How many of your businesses have got units within them that are tasked with disrupting your core business? If you're a large incumbent organization, probably not many of you, if any of you. If you're a startup or an entrepreneur, you live in Horizon 3.
So all of this change is hard enough for organizations to get their heads around. So you might be asking, what does all this mean for the customer?
So I'd like you to meet Anna. She's my new artificial intelligence hire. So she will be joining us for the rest of the presentation. So from a customer perspective, when we have a look at all of this change and this disruption, what does it really translate to? Basically pounds, shillings, and pence. So these different numbers have come from a variety of different surveys from Accenture, HSBC, as well as the MDIs. So today, 73% of millennials will want to try financial services from Apple, Google, and Nike, which is quite strange because Nike actually don't offer any financial services at all. But if they did offer financial services, quite a lot of people wouldn't mind trying them. So Apple, Google, and Nike, as well as a lot of other obvious candidates, they're your new competitors. 71% of millennials apparently would rather, and I went to the dentist yesterday, and I might actually agree with them here. 71% of millennials would rather visit the dentist than listen to their bank. Yeah, that's bad. You know, by any stretch of the imagination, that's not a statistic you want to sort of be able to put up there. 50% of millennials don't see themselves staying with their current bank, but that's just a headline number. What we kind of care about is how many are actually moving. And 18% of millennials have switched banks in the last 12 months. And as we know, when you join a bank as a young person, typically, historically, that's the bank that you've stayed with for the rest of your life. So you have over 3/4 of the millennials basically who would consider using services. That's turning off a huge amount of future pipeline and opportunity. Venmo in 2016 became a verb. Yeah, how many people basically go, hey, HSBC me some money? Yeah, or hey, Barclays me some money? No one. So again, when we start talking about differences basically between cultures, it's significant. 57% of people worry that their personal data will be compromised, and we've got some fun things there. 56% of people worry that their bank accounts and cards will be compromised, and I will be doing that later. But this is also a rather interesting statistic. It's actually quite a good one. from a financial services perspective, 14% of people, and this is from HSBC, 14% of people would trust a robot to carry out open heart surgery. Now, it doesn't say whether it's on themselves or whether it's on a friend or an enemy. However, only 11% would trust a robo mortgage advisor. Now, on the one hand, that's quite good, because when we start having a look at the automation of the front end, you know, the customer front end, this means that incumbent organizations have got time still. But frankly, I actually know a whole number of companies that are creating robo-surgeons, and I would not like to go anywhere near an autonomous robo-surgeon today. That's it. So I think maybe HSBC have been interviewing nutty people. But all of these statistics basically are sort of, yeah, they're quite telling. And here's a little bit of a fun quiz for you. So I met a number of people, well, I've met a number of people over the course of the past year. There was one representative of a bank who said, "My kids don't even see our bank as a brand." Another one said, "My fear is that we are going to be turned into a dumb pipe." And as for who said this publicly, otherwise I wouldn't be sharing it, the head of Santander Innoventure, his children don't see his bank as a brand. That's kind of an issue. And the CTO of Barclays is worried basically that Barclays are going to be turned into a dumb pipe. And by the way, the CEO of Verizon, AT&T, and all these other communications companies as well, they worry about exactly the same thing. The commoditization of products and services and being turned into just a dumb pipe that ends up riding basically on today's technology giants. So when we start having a look at the future of the customer, we have to stick basically someone in a virtual reality headset in there. Otherwise, it wouldn't look like we're talking about the future. But realistically, virtual reality isn't going to catch on for at least another 10 years, simply because people don't want to wear a big fat virtual headset. However, Facebook have now created VR glasses that are just the size of glasses. So technology always gets smaller, more compact, and everything else. These big, fat, chunky virtual reality headsets are not going to be with us for much longer. Now, stating the obvious from a customer experience perspective, banks that fail to provide a seamless omni-channel experience will quickly fall behind their more tech-savvy competitors. It's obvious. Yeah, when we talk about the future of customer service, it's obvious. It's not rocket science. In addition to that, I think personally, basically the customer experience is a feeling. It's how customers feel about you, your company, and your service. And that encapsulates all kinds of different things. As an institution, you can have the best product, you can have the best service, but if your company isn't seen as cool, if it's not seen as on trend, then you can get overtaken by somebody else. So it's not one thing. Customer service isn't just an interface. You have to completely get away from the idea, basically, the customer experience is an interface. It's everything about your company. How ethical are you? When you start having a look at some of the global asset managers, yeah, increasingly they're pulling all of their investments basically out of oil and gas. And the reason why they're doing that is because that affects the customer experience. They lose customers because customers go, "BlackRock, we think you're fantastic, but we don't like this part of your business," yeah, or whatever it happens to be. And then in terms of the future of payments, well, you can pay with your blood vessels, your face, your finger. If you're IKEA in Dubai, you can pay with time, which is quite an interesting one. You can pay in real life. You can pay on the web, in your app. You can pay in augmented reality or mixed reality. And if you're Alibaba and Alipay, you can pay in virtual reality as well, basically when you go to your virtual reality mall. So payments are riding the rails. But of course, when we start having a look at trying to improve the experience that customers get, there is a huge amount of debate and conversation about personalization. And personalization, you can do great things with data. Personally, I like this little statement: privacy is a myth. It's dead. We all know that online privacy no longer exists. But increasingly, your offline privacy no longer exists either. And I'm going to take you through some examples. Now, on the one hand, when we look at privacy, it's a very thin line. You need customers to be able to trust you with their data. If they don't trust you with their data, you cannot unlock the future, because in the future, we can do some stunning things with data. And it's not necessarily what you think. So firstly, the obvious, when we're starting to have a look at data, it's about the individual that you're trying to sell to or trying to engage. However, using artificial intelligence, machine vision, and a web camera, increasingly using algos from companies out of China and Israel, I can detect your character. I can assess your personality. I can assess your intent to criminality with a 96% accuracy. I can tell whether or not you are lying. So with this camera here, we have machine vision algorithms now that can essentially give me a credit score based on my character and my personality. So, for example, what if you actually started using these types of algorithms to approve loans? Because the AI says that this person's character shows them to be truthful, loyal, and noble. You just do that. In addition to that, basically, we have in sort of cybersecurity circles, basically, we have this concept basically of N-1. It's not just about you, it's also about your friends. So Facebook pulls in over 450 data points on all of us in order to profile us and create a profile. But increasingly, if I was seen to be an ethical and moral person, but I was hanging out with a huge number of serious organized crime bosses, then that would reflect on me, my credit score, how you view me as a potential customer, and all these kinds of things. When we start having a look at these devices are fantastic. They reveal a huge amount of information on us, basically, that you couldn't possibly imagine. So using the sensors in these phones, the way that I hold my phone indicates whether or not I'm depressed or upset. The speed I scroll indicates indicates my mood. How often I pick my phone up indicates my mood. How I hold it, how I type, my voice patterns. If I talk into these, just as again, machine vision and artificial intelligence, if I talk into the end of this particular phone or into this webcam and this microphone, you can tell whether I have PTSD, whether I have depression, whether I have dementia. You can tell whether or not I'm depressed. You can tell whether or not I have ADHD. Using these web cameras and the cameras on your phones, you can tell whether or not I have an inherited genetic disease. You can tell my state of health. You can tell my blood pressure, my heart rate, my emotional states. There is a huge amount of information you can drill out of today's existing technologies. And if you want to democratize access to primary healthcare, give me 2 students, $50 and a $300 smartphone. So there's loads that you can pick up. In addition to that, Amazon Alexa, Google Home, they are superb spying devices. When you start training the algorithms accordingly, they listen to everything. They can tell what time you open the oven. They can tell basically what's in your fridge. They can tell your education and your background. They can tell your health. So for example, the way that people speak when they get dementia changes. If you are starting to get ill, your voice resonates at a different level. So these catch high pitches and very low pitches. And Amazon Alexa could tell you now that you are getting ill 2 weeks before you show symptoms. So they can simply say, we think that you're getting ill. What we've done is we're automatically going to dial you up a GP using our new telehealth platform, and they'll have a little bit of a chat with you, and they can send you out an e-prescription if you like. But these can profile your behaviors, your background, your education, your emotional state, your health and wellness, all kinds of things. And then increasingly, as more and more transactions are actually brokered and managed and autonomously fulfilled by machines. In about 2025, we cross something called the inversion point. So the inversion point is a point in time where machines create more data than humans and make more decisions than humans. We're very, very close now. So for example, today, basically, if you get in your car, if you're allowed to go anywhere, you press the brake pedal. In the future, in an autonomous car, the car or artificial intelligence will press the brake pedal. When it comes to banking decisions, whether or not I get a mortgage, whether or not I get a loan, you know, humans obviously thump in data and capture data as well as machines, but a lot of the decisions are now automated. You know, startups live in this space of automation. This reduces the cost and time to make a decision on loans or applications almost down to a couple of minutes. You know, when I started my business, for example, I went with a particular global bank. It took 1.5 months to open a business bank account. What do you wait 1.5 months for anything? I can move house in a month once I get a mortgage. Now, from a machine's perspective, when you start gathering all of this different data together, let's see what happens when we start combining some simple LinkedIn data with Anna.
Morning, John. Here's a quick 2-minute summary of all of today's news from your LinkedIn network. I also noticed you seem stressed and heard your company's planning redundancies. Would you like to review your investments, savings, healthcare benefits, and pension plans? They're in the dashboard, and if you like, we can review them together and look for better alternatives.
So, for example, what you could do there is you could actually take LinkedIn data, bearing in mind that when people leave companies, they will change their LinkedIn profile from I work here to I work here, or they will start posting that they're available. You start sucking in that kind of data. You then start sucking in sensor data from smartwatches, which detects people's stress levels, or you use machine vision systems. You start listening to people's voices and their mannerisms using all of these different data points. And all of a sudden, on the one hand, you can see that John's company is making redundancies because we have that data. You can see that he is stressed because the cortisol levels in his blood indicate that from his wearable. And then you can tell that he's actually rather upset or perturbed by all of this by the way he holds his phone, the way he scrolls, the way he types, the words that he uses and everything else. But from a customer experience perspective, that's proactive. What's better? You know, so for example, in this case, if John's company was starting to make people redundant, if you were a bank, you could automatically use a digital human like Anna here to go to John and say, look, you know, we've actually, we've taken a look at your mortgage with us, and it's a repayment mortgage today, but because we can see that your company's making layoffs, we would like to offer you a pre-approved interest-only mortgage just for the next 3 months, just to get you by. Would you like to accept that? Click here, do a digital, use DocuSign to digitally sign everything, and there you go. You know, what's more helpful to the end user? Being laid off and then having to go to a bank, for example, or being proactive? And there's a huge amount of data that you can draw on to do some of these interesting things. However, automation only goes so far. You can automate lots and lots of different things today. And Anna basically is Anna that I show you. She's a relatively straightforward bot. She cost me about 20 pence to make. But you have digital humans from companies like Soul Machines that have neural network brains that you can talk with. So increasingly we have conversational artificial intelligence. We have NatWest in the UK that are starting to use some of these digital humans to actually sell mortgages and actually service customers and all that sort of stuff. But in a number of, that's fine for different demographics, depending on the customer set that you serve. But some customers still want a human voice, human interaction, and everything else, whether it's high net worth individuals and wealth managers, or whether it's just the old lady on the street or the old gentleman on the street. So there has to be this balance between what you automate and what you keep personal, very personal in terms of human to human. And as for where we can collect even more data about people's habits from, fully autonomous vehicles. Yeah, this is essentially just a massive sensor network that can detect all those things that I mentioned before and more. And then bearing in mind that 50 to 60% of people are very worried about the security of their bank accounts, their credit cards, and all this sort of stuff. Yeah, when you start having a look at the future of trust, security, whether it's cyber security or just general security, technology is attacking again. So today I can clone your face, your fingerprints, and your voice with 5 minutes of video, 1 minute of audio, and I can clone your face with a selfie. I can turn your 2D face in a photo into a 3D fluid video avatar. In addition to that, I can also create a whole variety of different synthetic people on demand. So this isn't just deep fakes. This is a technology far beyond that. And increasingly, I can do it for a very, very low price. So here's a little bit of a quiz. What does 1 minute and £257,000 have in common? Now, in this particular case, there was a German CEO. Somebody took 1 minute to clone his voice. Once they'd cloned his voice, they then just managed to type in whatever they wanted this voice, this synthetic voice, to say. So this German CEO, this fake German CEO, phoned up the CEO of a UK FTSE 100 energy company and asked them to transfer money into an Eastern European bank account. The first time didn't go very well, so they phoned back again. On the second time and said, well, we've noticed you haven't transferred the money. We need you to transfer the money now. Can you transfer the money now? On the second go, the CEO of a UK energy company transferred £257,000 into a hacker's bank account. It's a biometric attack. And this is in the New York Times. You can read this. And the insurance company, which in this case was Euler, ended up paying out. But that is one example of where I can take any of your biometric information, whether it's your face, your voice, it doesn't matter what it is, whether it's a fingerprint, and I can clone it. And I can start doing all kinds of strange things. In addition to that, when we start thinking about phishing attacks, where people get sent an email, you've won the lottery, click here, or, whatever it happens to be. This is the future of phishing attacks. So I send you all a WhatsApp link. It looks genuine, maybe. I send you an email. It looks genuine. So I put some work into that. And for whatever reason, you decide to click it.
Hi, I'm Tanya from Banco do Brasil. Thank you for clicking the link we sent you. We noticed some odd activity on your account with us. So as a precaution, we've set you up a new account and just need your authorization to protect your money while we investigate the matter further. And don't worry, your money is perfectly safe still. Thank you in advance for your cooperation. We appreciate it.
She's essentially a deep fake, and she cost me, I don't know, about 1 pence to make. Stick a neural network brain in her, as we're already seeing. And here's the rub. She can target me. She can target 1 billion people at the same time. In addition to that, using something called effective computing, she can use these very same web cameras, and IBM demonstrated this a little while ago, to target me. So they can send me this particular message. She can read my emotions, and she can speak to me in a natural language. And at that point, she can see that I'm a little bit put off. I don't trust that she isn't a genuine person. At which point she starts changing her script and she starts behaving in a different way. We are starting to get to the point where we can personalize phishing attacks in ways that we've never imagined before. So when it comes to trust and security, you can spin this as you're aware of these things and you can protect people. You have a way to protect people against these types of new biometric or synthetic attacks.
1 second.
In addition to that, I'd like to introduce you to one of my friends. He just happens to be on the Zoom
Hey,
call.
guys.
Oh,
There
I Elon Musk.
Yes. Looks like I got into the wrong conference in Zoom. How are you doing, guys?
Good. How are you?
Good.
I'm nice.
This
Thank
is
you.
amazing.
Nice hair color, by the way.
Thank you.
It's Elon.
Well, then have a nice day. Bye.
I have a song.
Bye.
Bye.
Have a nice day.
So over time, technology reduces the cost of doing everything, including creating deepfakes. And in that case, that is not a deepfake of Elon Musk. That is somebody with a web camera and they have a Elon Musk, in that case, bad voice, but an Elon Musk mask being applied over their own face. So, and disruption is everywhere. You know, when we have a look at construction, for example, this is in Mexico, we are 3D printing buildings. We're 3D printing communities. It isn't just the banking industry that is being disrupted. It is every single industry that is being disrupted. And those are now built. The cost of building those was $15,000. In France, if you want to build a 4-bed house, it costs you about 200,000 euros. If you 3D print a 4-bed house, it costs you 24,000 euros. Technology disrupts everything. And of course, you can now 3D print a house, but you need an energy source. So why don't we do something a little bit sci-fi again and 3D print a nuclear reactor? So this is the US Department of Energy 3D printing a nuclear reactor in the lab, complete with a nuclear core. When we start talking about the things that you can do today with technology, we are way beyond basically what most people think, and we are way beyond science fiction. And then when we start having a look at healthcare, consider this. There are a whole variety of new healthcare technologies coming through as well. So if you're a bank and you offer a 25-year or a 35-year mortgage today, why not offer a 50? So for example, basically in about the year 2027, 2030, most biotech and healthcare companies are now talking about reaching something called escape velocity. Escape velocity is where we end up with new treatments and new healthcare products that extend the human life by more than a year for every year that goes by. So today, the average life expectancy is around 80. By the year 2040, we could very well start seeing 100 becoming the new 60. We could start seeing 120 becoming the new 70 or 80. In which case, when you are helping your customers prepare for the future, so whether it's pensions, wealth and wealth management, investments, advice, all that kind of stuff, buying houses, this presents you with opportunities to do things differently. Yeah, when we have a look at the way that most banking services are managed today, they're kind of set basically along the 19th century sort of premise. We can 3D print human organs. So increasingly, if you have a car accident, we can do this in the UK. We can 3D print bone, artificial human skin, livers, kidneys, parts of hearts. We can 3D print brains. Yeah, this extends human life. In vivo gene editing using a genetic engineering technology called CRISPR, and we're almost there, we managed to put a person who had a inherited genetic disease onto a drip. He had something called Hunter's syndrome. Hunter's syndrome, the good news with Hunter's syndrome is that you die in 20 years. The bad news with Hunter's syndrome is that you die painfully in 20 years. From a technology perspective, we are already at the point, and we've used it on humans, where you can use a gene editing tool that's in an intravenous drip. That gene editing tool goes in, identifies the person's faulty genes, clips them out, puts new genes in, and cures their inherited genetic condition. That one technology means that over 6,000 currently uncurable diseases are now curable.
We're going to use
And then
haptic Tesla
why don't we just change the
gives
game?
wearer the ability to feel
Startups
temperature,
change
pressure,
the game.
and touch. In Coventry,
Technology
there's a tackle cylinder.
changes
Inside
the game.
tackle cylinder is a set of sensors and an accelerometer.
Who likes rugby?
When a player tackles that cylinder, the accelerometer will measure the impact of the force, the direction of travel, and whereabouts on the tackle cylinder the tackle is made. I see you've got a couple of the local rugby kids there to help us out, which is fantastic.
Not too bad for little man, eh? Oh,
So this is playing rugby 100 miles away from each other.
Oh, I think I felt that one.
That feels like a real tackle in a real match.
Yeah, it went through a whole body instantly.
Juan, thank you so much.
So in that case, we're changing the way that people play rugby using haptic suits. So technology gives you the opportunity not just to change the game, but every game. If you're an incumbent within a particular industry, today more than ever, you need to ask yourselves, are you playing the right game? And the right game is everything's up for grabs. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. I hope it gave you something to think about. I hope you enjoyed your coffees and your gin and your tequilas. And thank you very much.
Okay, so Matthew, it seems that we have some questions and I expect that more will come. So the first question came from Anna from B3.
Yep.
She's asking if the cost of doing business is going to be as close as to zero as possible, will we all be selling security, regulated or sanctioned services? Meaning people can access everything for free. What will we sell?